Twinship, continuing our lecture. In the first part, we had covered mirroring, idealization, empathy, self-objects. We had come to twinship, and now we continue in the second lecture. What is the concept of twinship and how does it come about in the Kohutian school and in the practice of Kohutian therapy? You may not be trained completely in Kohutian therapy, but still you can have a Kohut informed therapy. It would be much better than otherwise. Twinship refers to a delightful fusion with a friend like other. Freud refers to this in his typology of relationships. Freud says we can divide all relationships in three groups. The relationship of the parent to a child, the relationship of a teacher to a student, and relationship of friends. And of course, he says all the three formats come together in different proportions to create different types of relationships. In that sense, the three formats are elemental formats of relationships. Just as you have primary colors which come together to create millions of colors, these three types come together to create hundreds of other types of relationships. And of course, Freud said neither of these three is enough, nor any combination of these three available in society is enough for therapeutic work, and therefore a fourth kind of relationship is necessary. Relationship of a therapist to a client within the structure of the therapy, the framework, the frame of the therapy. So the frame of the therapy creates a fourth kind of relationship, because in the three naturally occurring forms of relationships and their naturally occurring combinations, it's difficult to do therapeutic healing. One important element which Freud refers to there is the element of friendship as being one of the elemental forms of human relationships. And something close to it, not exactly it, but something close to it, is referred to by Kohut in terms of twinship. Twinship is a relationship, a friendly relationship, which is a delightful relationship with the other. It is, in one sense, a post self-object stage. One is ready for the other who is not the self-other but a real other. And one finds somebody compatible, good enough for that relationship. So this is a prototype in one way of future friendships and future professional relationships, the twinship. And the other is not only good enough, but the other is a catalyst. In his presence, one is able to articulate things which one does not feel comfortable articulating in presence of others who are not in the twinship setup. He is also the archetypal playmate. And one experiences here object compatibility. sharing, empathy, loyalty, and sacrifice between the two. In essence, the twinship is an experience of being one with the other, who is a real other, but a soft other, a delicate other, a related other, not a professional other to start with. And this will then move towards a more hard relationship with the professional other. So the self other in a way is a springboard for twinship, and twinship is a springboard for future friendships and professional relationships. What it leads to in the mind is this: I can have safe, healthy, and pleasant relationship in the mode of friendship, either in the personal space or in the professional space. I can be myself in the relationship. Relationship does not bother me, does not suffocate me, does not dominate me, does not make me go into anything unpleasant. It also prepares one to be a twin, from twinship to a group. That if twinship is fine, one is prepared to go into a group. Initially a personal group, then into a professional group. So it's a twinship is also a springboard to the group. Twinship helps, the twin actually helps with life in the group. So if I have a twin, a friend, and I enter into a group, the person actually helps me with the group, within the group, getting into the group, supporting me in the group, and so on. The twin actually facilitates the transition to a group life, and then stabilization in the group life, and then leadership in the group life. One always is looking for a twin in the group, even in the adult state. So just as you move from a safe parent to a safe friend, from a safe friend to a safe group, and the personal and professional relationships both require twinship. Difficulty in twinship also can lead to an unhealthy self, which will come out in the relational patterns and lack of cohesion. The alter ego. So we have to differentiate between the self-other, the self-other, the twin, and the alter ego. Twin and the alter ego both are the other, but the good the other, the soft the other. But between them, there is a difference. The twin is actually a real good other, a compatible other, whereas the alter ego is somebody who is like me. So actually, if you look, it would be, the transition would be from the self other to the alter ego to the twin, or in some case it can be from twin to the alter ego. It is relating to somebody like me, and often it can be more difficult than relating to a twin. So one can go from self-object to twin to the alter ego, or one can go from self-object to the alter ego to the twin, or one may have it together. The alter ego is somebody like me, the other, but it is like the uh, self is put into somebody else, not in the literal sense, but one sees a emanation of the self and going into someone else, not in the literal sense, but in the sense somebody like me exists. It is somebody like me. not somebody controlled by me. So there is a sense of a self-object, but actually he is the other. It is like the other who is like me, but a distinct object. So one can phrase it as the other self, other hyphen self hyphen object. But he is without doubt another. He is not a self object, but he is like the self. I see myself out there, I am not alone. And you see parts of others, when they substantially are like us, we feel they are our alter ego. And we see, I see myself out there, I am not alone. There are others like me, and it makes me belong safely to a community. Uniqueness brings this anxiety also, anxiety of being alone, being unique. He is an extension of me. Not in the sense he differs to me, but in the sense he is like me. I should not say extension, I should say he is a multiplication of me. He is a multiplication of me, and it's a very narcissistic desire of gratification of multiplying oneself. Seeing me, the beloved, multiple times. This also leads to a narcissistic gratification of belonging to an aristocratic group. So the moment the alter ego is seen in the mind, unconsciously a group is created. You belong to the group, so the anxiety is quenched. You are no longer alone, and the group is then endowed with aristocracy of being special, the chosen one. The greatness of the alter ego, real or endowed in the mind, can then be identified with. Our own mortality can be denied by identifying with the younger alter ego. There is a natural emotional relatedness to the alter ego. And there is a great narcissistic satisfaction in mentoring or helping the alter ego. And this is a unique kind of relationship. In most mentoring relationships, we have the alter ego relationships or the narcissistic dependent relationship. Of course, I'm referring to relationships unconsciously determined. Often it is the alter ego who is young will carry the flame forward. He is myself beyond me. He is my immortality. The arc of tension. Kohut talks about arc of tension being the tension between the goals and one's competence. The arc has to be optimum. No tension will not result in hard work, stretching of one's competence, building up of one's competence, and too large or too acute an arc of tension will cripple the person under the weight of the goal. So developing a healthy self means having an optimum arc of tension. It is a journey from ego strength to healthy ego strength or super ego strength. A super ego in both ways. superego strength in the Freudian sense of superego. And let me just so it is the movement from ego strength to extraordinary ego strength. It's also a movement of superego strength. We look at superego essentially as a source of pathology when we talk about superego pathology. But superego also is a source of strength and happiness, which few of us realize. And this arc of tension enables us to experience not only experience but also develop and experience the fruits thereof of ego strength but also superego strength. Industry initiative is appreciated, supported, admired when we are presented with an optimum arc of tension in the childhood and adequately supported and admired for it. We learn this, that industry initiative is appreciated, supported, and admired. And this makes us more venturesome, industrious in the real world of work. This arc prepares us for the professional life. Mostly we find catastrophic thinking in professional life. And in the Kohutian sense, it would be because of failure of many things. One of them would be the optimum arc of tension experience. In the beginning, the arc has to create a balance between the home and the outside. A home which is admiring and outside which is challenging. And slowly one is free from support from home. One has internalized those supports. Arc of tension is an arc of healthy challenge and growth. It helps overcome pathological narcissism, at the same time helps us develop healthy narcissism. Arc of tension brings in reality and logos into eros. Of course, this is successful when there is adequate eros already present. Arc builds the core of confidence out there in the world. It is, of course, post good experiences of eros. It is a post mirroring, idealization, self-object experiences, empathy experiences. It is post that. It's an event of childhood but post infancy. Impingement. How do you understand this? Impingement is intrusion. Too much interference with the child. So the child needs the caregiver to be near him, but a caregiver who allows the child, what Winnicott says, going on being. So the child feels secure that there is somebody near him, but that person does not interfere. He supports, he takes interest, but there is a difference between taking interest and being interfering and overbearing, dictating. What happens is when the going on being is happening, there is a spontaneous cohesion enhancing of the self. The cohesion of the self goes on consolidating as the going on being goes on. And every intrusion, every impingement actually shatters that going on being and the process of spontaneous cohesion of the self, the consolidation of the cohesion of the self. It's like there is a cement at work and you don't allow the cement to really gain strength. Cement, of course, produced by nature itself inside the mind. There is irritation and anger when impingement happens and the self disintegrates. And therefore, there is a need for a secure base, a secure presence of a person who is not intrusive. When does impingement mostly happen? It happens when the parents are anxious, the parents are intruding, the parents are obsessive. You have passive aggressive parent, your parent with catastrophic thinking, your parent with micromanagement and obsessive traits, parents who have no sense of boundary, parents who themselves don't have any peace, who have haste, restlessness, anxiety. They are the most common parents, and they are the impingement is more common. It's more of a rule rather than an exception. Expression of affect is also related to impingement. The more the impingement, more is the outburst of irritation and anger, or if it is suffocated and muffled up, bottled up, then more is the inward turning of that affect. The expression of affect related to any failure of parenting. If impingement is less, we can have a very clear one-to-one expression of affect, of an action happening, an event happening, and the child expressing, or there's too much of bottling up already, or there's too much of expression already, and there's too much of displacement, too much of condensation. It's very difficult to make out what is the affect related to an event and how it is getting entangled with prior affects in expression. So the expression itself gets botched up. It gets distorted when there's too much of impingement, apart from disintegration of the self and inability of the self to really have a strong consolidation of cohesion. Sorry, strong consolidation and cohesion. The ego strength reduces, disintegration increases, and repeated attacks of later years, what happens in adult life is then connect back to that early life intrusion, and one never experiences a safe boundary, and therefore constant anxiety and rage against it. So what does intrusion lead to? Sorry, impingement lead to? One, it is intrusion. Second, it is spoiling of the feeling of a secure base. It is violating safe space and the safe boundary. There is a difference. If there is no impingement, the child feels peace, relaxation, and happiness, versus if there is impingement, there is always a feeling of haste, anxiety, and restlessness. And this become then the basic states, default states, that even when there is nothing at work, one feels either of these states. Either one gets into a state of haste, anxiety, and restlessness, this becomes the default state, or peace, relaxation, and happiness becomes the default state. Of course, if peace, relaxation, happiness becomes the default state, it's a welcome thing, not the other one. And this is based upon impingement. If impingement is there, haste, anxiety, and restlessness becomes the unfortunate default state. If there is no impingement, one is at home with oneself, and one is used to caring, not being intruded upon. It allows organic development. If there's no impingement, it allows organic development of the self, going on being, and development of the true self. One doesn't have to put up a false self to comply with the intrusion. Micromanagement, unwanted advice, criticism, comparison, these are some of the ways in which impingement happens. Freedom to experiment, freedom to fail, support from a distance, presence but no intrusion. These are instances of no impingement and healthy for development of a healthy self. Social intrusion happens not only in between parents and children, but often in groups. People speak over one another. They don't allow somebody to complete their statement. They intrude into the affairs of others. And all these intrusions, they cause disintegration, anxiety, rage. Holding. Holding is a very important Kohutian concept. In childhood, there is a physical holding, and the physical holding also provides the child to think of himself as a one consolidated whole, as one would see oneself in the mirror. It's a form of mirroring in one sense, or Lacanian mirroring in one sense. Not Kohutian mirroring, but Lacanian mirroring. There is a physical holding of the child, and we all need the human touch. It's a very important part of well-being. And the child also gets Lacanian mirroring in that physical holding. There is an emotional holding, which is like Bionian containment. And projective identification in therapy, where we emotionally hold. The patient puts difficult emotions into us. We start feeling anxious, rage, sadness, and we hold it. We don't act out. That's emotional holding. Holding back and interpretation. It's also a form of holding. The client says something narcissistic and we don't interpret it. We allow the client to experience that narcissism. By an act of omission, we are providing holding. Holding anxiety, which is put into us by the client in different ways. It may be by projective identification, it may be by countertransference. In the Kohutian approach, we are also holding a space to live out the fantasy. We allow the therapy space to become a holding space to live out fantasy. Holding in the face of projective identification, like projective identification comes and we hold those feelings. We can positively articulate them to the client that this is what is happening, but we don't act it out. And that gives a lot of relief to the client, a lot of healing to the client. Holding can also mean an active containment of Bionian type, which is processing what the client cannot process himself. So he puts it into you. You process it and give it back to the client. Or it can be a very deep holding of what Bion calls the height of active containment, which is holding into O. Holding, deepening the holding till one gets into the state of O. One facilitates O. self-cohesion, the concept. What is self-cohesion? If you imagine the self as a building and all the bricks are coming together and they cement between the bricks and it creates a whole building. Now the strength of that cement will be the strength of cohesion of that building. And if bricks fall off because the cohesion is low, the adhesive between the bricks is low. If the bricks fall off, we call it disintegration. Yeah. So there is creation of the brick wall, the strength of the adhesive, which we call the strength of cohesion. And if a brick falls off, we call it disintegration. This is a parallel to the self. Kohut does not define a self. Kohut does not locate the self in any model of the mind. Kohut also is ambiguous at times between in clearly demarcating the self and the ego. At some places, he is very clear the two are separate. At other places, when he writes about the self, it almost seems as though he's writing about the ego. Self-creation is not something Kohut goes into as to how the self is created. There are two ways of looking at it. One, there is a nuclear self which organically develops into a full self, and it is inborn, or it gets born in at some time in the childhood. Or the other way is that there are elementals which come together to create a self, and there are adhesives on the boundary lines of these elementals. And of course, these elementals have to be cognitive elementals and affective elementals. And the way these psychic elementals come together, their coming together is affected by the 12 factors. Kohut is not clear whether the self develops from one nuclear seed self into a larger organic self, or many elementals come together to manufacture a self. Kohut is not clear about this element, this part of theory. Kohut is also not clear about conscious self-cohesion enhancement. Can consciously one work upon oneself for enhancing cohesion? In Indian psychotherapy, Indian psychology, Indian spirituality, there are elements towards this, but not in Western psychotherapy, not in Kohut, not even in Western psychotherapy for that matter. We just rely on long-term self-cohesion enhancement, which happens in therapy by internalization of a good object and by non-attack by an object. And through that long experience and through some things that happen which we don't know, somehow strong ego strength, strong self emerges in the long process of therapy. There is a detailed lecture of mine on what are the factors which go into creating of a healthy self or an unhealthy self. You can go through that lecture. In the East, there is this whole idea of idol science. One small part of idol science is idol therapy, and one of the things it addresses is self-cohesion. But that's a different topic altogether. Some other time we will discuss that. There can be conscious practices of visualization, thinking, and doing things in practice for enhancing self-cohesion. Lack of self-cohesion will lead to easy self-disintegration and catastrophic thinking. Anxiety will be seen arising almost from the physical foundation of one's being. Spirituality, God, Guru, good objects, they all enhance self-cohesion. Many times they help us achieve some closure and which enhances self-cohesion. The goal of self-cohesion is one of the very important goals of cohesion therapy. In fact, it's a goal of many therapy approaches, although they don't realize it. Another important concept of Kohut is the concept of disintegration. It's opposite of self-cohesion. More the self-cohesion, less the disintegration. Less the self-cohesion, more the self-disintegration. And we see how self-cohesion builds up because of factors that Kohut lists out. We are on a continuum of integration and disintegration of the self. And of course, there is a disintegration anxiety every time the self disintegrates. The self-disintegration can happen for a variety of things. It can be attack of repressed affect from inside. It can be attack of envy from inside. It can be an attack from outside. It can be an attack of catastrophic thinking from inside. It may be rooted, some events may happen inside, rooted in I am not good enough. Most often catastrophic thinking happens rooted on I am not good enough, I am not strong enough. And then the self disintegrates and there is a wave of anxiety. When the self is disintegrating, it is one problem of what we would, another way of phrasing it would be to say it's a self-esteem stabilization problem. The two are not exact equivalents, but it's a rephrasing, approximate rephrasing. Self-esteem can be seen as it's another way of looking at self-stability. And megalomaniac expansion or disintegration of the self, both are problems. So one way to look at this problem is from a self-esteem stabilization point of view. That a low self-esteem will lead to the disintegration of the self or to the formation of the narcissistic self. It will create a fragile front either ways. Either the self disintegrates and then there is borderline event creation or psychosis, or a reaction formation happens and from a low self-esteem a narcissistic self is created. Either ways there is a problem. And the goal of course is to stabilize the self-esteem in the optimum zone. We are looking essentially at a fragile front in either situation. But self-esteem can also be independently there apart from being entangled with cohesion. Disintegration, strangely, can also be a learned behavior. If one sees parents who consciously or unconsciously are disintegrating or doing catastrophic thinking, and after that disintegrating partially, of course, not completely, it can also be a deeply learned behavior. And one has to deeply work on oneself in a behavioral sense then to overcome it. Disintegration also is a socio-economic phenomenon. The lower you are on the socio-economic scale, more is the propensity to disintegrate. It can also be rooted in early life object relations, especially of object loss. Early life object loss also leads to easy disintegration, less cohesion. Spirituality, God, awareness, idol therapy, spiritual practices, holistic healing practices, they are all used to enhance integration, reduce disintegration, and also enhance cohesion. Transmuting internalization. This is a very important concept of Kohut, very near to internalization of a good object of Klein, but they are different. Transmuting internalization is a more wider phenomena than just internalization of a good object. Not only wider, it's different, because in transmuting internalization, we are not looking only at internalization, but also transmutation. So there is internalization and transmutation. In internalization of a good object, we are looking at internalization of a particular entity in a good object. But we are not looking at transmutation, which will follow internalization of a good object. What Kohut means by transmuting internalization is this. If we have the presence of the good other, we feel peaceful. But if we are alone and there's nobody with us, we might feel anxious. We might feel lonely. The moment somebody is present, that loneliness goes off. We feel positive, we feel happy, we feel secure. And that's because we are essentially a herd species, a social species. Alone, there is a natural mounting of anxiety, a natural upsurge of anxiety and pain. So the presence of the good other makes us happy, secure, energetic, positive, industrious. When the other goes away, for some time it is retained, the positivity is retained, the goodness of the other's presence is retained, and then we start feeling lonely, we start feeling depressed, lonely, less energy, demotivated, gloomy. We feel anxiety and rage, which means the effects of the presence of the good other are like a perishable commodity. They have a shelf life, and we are forever dependent on presence of the good objects. We can live without good objects only for some time without feeling distressed. Kohut says there is a phenomena of transmuting internalization, whereby if we internalize the goodness of the good object or goodness of anything or any template, and we internalize it so much, so deeply, that a change happens in us and we are no longer dependent on the outside for something that we like, something that we need. It is like superego development, if you want to draw a Freudian parallel. Initially, the child says the father does not like it. Then the child says the father says he does not like it. And then the child says, I don't like it. He is identified with the morality of the father. So first there is introjection, then there is internalization, then there is identification. After identification, what happens in Freudian sense is what Kohut refers to as transmuting internalization. An internalization so deep, so acceptable, that it transmutes something from inside. Even if not acceptable, it's so deep, so intense, that it transmutes something inside. And Kohut refers to it in the positive sense, but it can happen also in the negative sense. Trauma, in one sense, is a negative transmuting internalization. There is internalization of a good, reliable, stable object, which leads to transmuting internalization in a positive sense, of course. Psychoanalysis has always been a tool deficient area, and Kohut also has not developed tools how to facilitate this apart from expecting it to happen and facilitating in some way in long-term therapy. But on a do-it-yourself basis, Kohut has not developed tools like any other psychoanalyst, and we are a tool deficient area. We need to develop tools. Some of the tools can be conscious efforts and intention and visualization to develop a transmuting internalization based upon any objective we have. Idle science, idle therapy can be one way out. Knowledge, affect release, insight, interpretation, these are all tools of consciously doing transmuting internalization. And we also have to focus on the state of change. In which state transmuting internalization can be facilitated, because there is also a state effect on transmuting internalization. In hypnotherapy, we create a state and then try to use our tools in that state to induce change, which is very near to what Kohut would say transmuting internalization. In ISTDP, we do the same thing. We create a state of crisis artificially, and then we try to use our tools to bring about a structural change, catharsis and structural change. Similarly, in the Kohutian framework also, we can create a facilitating state, and then in the presence of that state, use Kohutian tools to introduce, to facilitate, accelerate transmuting internalization. Kohut has not talked about this, but it can easily be developed. Spirituality, karma, journey of life, free will, these are also the concepts which we can bring in, but that brings in spirituality, Hindu spirituality essentially into psychoanalysis. But these outside tools from Hindu spirituality can be brought in. Concept of state and tools can be brought in to facilitate transmuting internalization. Kohut silently appropriated. Kohut is one of those whose ideas have silently been appropriated without being given credit, without any sense of gratitude. A tragic thing to happen, but it is indeed so. Just as in the past, Carl Rogers was completely appropriated. The unconditional self-acceptance became silently appropriated by everyone, enabling the person to find his own solution by giving him a unconditional positive self-regard. Similarly, Kohut also has been silently appropriated by other schools of psychoanalysis, other schools of psychotherapy outside of psychoanalysis also. Kohut's concepts of empathy, holding, have been appropriated by practically all schools. ISTDP hesitatingly, unwillingly, screaming and kicking was dragged into accepting that fragile patients need holding. That fragile patients cannot close their splits by themselves. The split closing work cannot happen, they need holding. In personality disorders, we always find concept and technique of Kohut has to be used. Concepts of the 5 A's, concept of idealization, concept of self-object experiences. Techniques of Kohut have to be used if we have to reduce patients ejecting out of therapy. So Kohut has been silently appropriated unknowingly by all schools of psychoanalysis when they are treating personality disorders. The pervasiveness of the mirroring crisis we see in society. And Kohut rightly says, we are looking at a society where mirroring failure and self-object failure is a kind of a social custom now in the modern day society. So we are, what Kohut says, the tragic man and the guilty man. We are now looking at patients who are essentially falling under the group of the tragic man, who have problems of the self, not really drive problems. Not that they don't have drive problems, but in most cases we see the self formation problems and the object relations problems are at the root, and the drive problems are secondary. They are there, but they are secondary. And much of it has to do with the flavor of society. We live in a hedonistic society, and therefore drives don't have much to fear from. The good other to heal myself. This search is frustrated now. The other has become too much of an individualist to really be a good other to heal me. And Kohut brings in this element of counter-Western thinking into Western psychotherapy. In the drive frustration model, it was the classical Western thinking of what Sartre said, the other is the hell. The other frustrates my drive. But Kohut puts it the other way around, that the other is the sunshine. And it is the presence of the other that makes me secure, energetic, industrious, positive, happy. In a way, it's an indirect admission of the centrality of object relations, but in a specific context that Kohut talks about. To reduce Kohut to object relations would be over-essentializing. Kohut also brought to the center stage universality of healthy narcissism. First, universality of narcissism, and then the concept of healthy narcissism. And this is the history of psychoanalysis. You start off with the concept as a pathological entity. Then we say it's universally found, but in low volumes, low intensity in everyone. And then we say there can be a healthy version of it. So X is pathological, X is universal in low volumes in everyone, and X can have a healthy version of healthy X. This is the traditional history of psychoanalysis for most concepts. Start by a very negative articulation of a concept, go to the universality of that concept, and then come to the positive rendition of that concept, a positive flavor of that concept. The crisis that is there in classical psychoanalysis has many cures and the crisis is not monochromatic. It's not one problem, one solution crisis. There are many problems in psychoanalysis, and therefore many solutions are needed to complement and provide health psychoanalysis. But one of the solutions is the cohesion approach. It is not the solution, not the only solution. It does not mean that classical psychoanalysis does not work. Nothing of that type. Classical psychoanalysis is a great edifice. It works. It is incomplete. It needs complementing from various sources. One of the sources is Kohut. Kohut also brings in the holding to heal. It can go to the extent of joining in with teenagers, being partners in crime to heal them. So you are partners in crime with them while you navigate the boat towards healing, and the teenager does not know about it, or the child does not know about it. From holding to heal in the classical therapy context, to joining in case of children and teenagers, to living it out. This would be the next step in the cohesion thing. And this is very common in the Eastern spirituality, Hindu spirituality, especially Tantric spirituality. And the holding to heal can also go to, as we said, where holding also contains active containment, then we go to facilitating the O, Bionian O. And Kohut's concept of the self can be more clearly defined, crystallized, worked with if we use Aurobindo model of the mind, and the frontal ego then becomes the self of Kohut. Because we always feel the disintegration in front of the chest by and large. And I have tried to put together Freudian, Jungian, and Aurobindo model of the mind. And Aurobindo model of the mind also contains the Tantra model of the mind. In my model of the mind called heat, so that as a specific case can explain Kohut's entity of the self. Thank you. It has been a long discussion and a large scope of discussion. How you can detail out Kohut's 12 concepts, the central 12 concepts, I have tried to discuss today in 2 sessions. This detailing out will make it simpler to understand the concepts and apply them in therapy. You can recognize something at play and then correspondingly use a cohesion technique or some other technique which you feel can heal. Thank you.